thanks for coming. Taking for granted that games can be used as a medium of communication, just like literature, film, and music, and so on, is of course not a revelation for you guys, but how we're actually dealing with it in our development of our true story adventure game, Cosmic Top Secret, might hopefully be inspiring for you to hear about. Anyways, that's why we're here. And I'm director Trine Laier. My parents worked for the Danish intelligence fighting against the Red Menace. This is producer Lise Saxtrup. Her parents were devoted communists and might have been under the surveillance of my parents. And this is our programmer Kristian, Torgard, who actually doesn't know whether his parents are spies or not. These are our foundings that we want to share with you, that reality is fun and inspiring, that mechanics can edit reality, and vice versa, and that the personal aspect can be engaging. We will try to document these points by examples from Cosmic Top Secret, which is developed as an autobiographical game about a woman. It's actually me, trying to find out what my parents worked for at the Danish intelligence during the Cold War. And while on her mission, she realizes that her parents are getting old and fragile and that they're not going to be there to protect her forever. She needs to prepare herself to manage without them, and she thinks she needs to understand their secret lives to continue her own life. The point is that all parents and all children have secrets, Cold War spies or not. And we ask if secrets do something to our relations, maybe just think about it. As for now, we will show you the trailer, so you'll get a sense of what it's all about.
Kender vi egentlig hinanden?
Trine Laier.
Hej far.
Hej T. Jeg har fundet noget dit. En hulfremme med kode på, tror jeg, og dine initialer.
Det er dig så ikke.
Hvad betyder Y hen? Yderst hemmeligt. Nej, det kan jeg ikke svare på.
Alle spionerer mod alle.
Vent far, var du spion?
Nej, nu må jeg løbe.
Far! Control panel.
Og det handlede vel om Sovjetunionen, går ud fra.
Det kunne det gøre. Det kunne det gøre.
Jo, det skal godt blive sjovt, det her. Vent, mor. Ved du, hvad det var, far arbejdede med dengang for efterretningstjenesten?
Nej, jeg var i en anden afdeling.
Var du også i efterretningstjenesten? Hvor var du?
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Far, tror du egentlig, I fik afværget en atomkrig? Altså, tror du, at det har været tæt på?
Der var situationer, hvor det var meget tæt på. Ingen tvivl om det.
Stój! Agentka! Jesteś aresztowana!
CosmicTopSecretGame.com.
The documentary is celebrated worldwide, and never earlier have the documentary experienced such development and exploration of form and content. Stories are subject to political, social, and emotional discussions, giving voices to experimenting artists, devoted and dedicated journalists and filmmakers, dramatizing and designing stories to keep an audience engaged. The stories arise from reality and often exceeds imagination, and if they were made up, they would seem completely unrealistic. In Cosmic Top Secret, the protagonist realizes that her dad worked for the Danish intelligence. The A-plot of the game deals with the actual investigation of what he did there. So what is so attractive about the real? To us, there's a dimension about this really happened, which means that this could actually happen to me. It's an instant and identifiable dimension. Then there's all the free stuff that you experience. It's a person's gesture, its moods, its lights, its accidents, its language, and stuff you could have never made up. It seems so right, and we think that it's because it's real. The way Dad's character in the game is animated is actually the real Dad's gestures. We took up the sound so you can really experience his gestures. Like this. And of course, what I just mentioned, that reality exceeds imagination. In our A-plot, the protagonist investigates her dad's work for the Danish intelligence, as I said, and she also finds out that Mom worked there too. So, and she even worked in a more classified position, so that's kind of a surprise. Also, Mom trained the Danish queen, Margaret, in mastering judo, fencing, and other military disciplines. So in that sense, the real never ceased to surprise and inspire us. And maybe you remember the last time you were telling friends about what you did last night or your summer holidays. You're most likely trying not to be too boring, and you passed on your experiences with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. Or imagine that you're a director or a journalist and your attention is caught by something that could turn into be an amazing story. You begin your research by talking to people and reading and searching in ways you know. And in the beginning, you may not be that structured, but your preferences, whatever they are, lead you from one point to another. And while some things support your interest, other doesn't. You pick and you choose, and a selection of reality has already begun. So during the research, and especially when telling people about what you're doing, the structure of reality begins. By passing on your work, you do at the same time try to make sense to yourself, always in retrospect about what you're doing. You might choose to let out what research went nowhere and highlighting what actually ended up uncovering the truth. In films, editing, sound, visual, research are all examples of tools you use for your design process. You want to engage your audience and tell a story the best way you can. You have a design that helps you pass on the story, and it becomes your reality. So understood this way, documentaries are designed realities. And in this perspective, the real story is just as suitable as any other story when designing games. I probably do not have to defend our wish to work with games here, but frequently we've been asked why we're not also doing a documentary film about Tia and her dad. But from the very beginning, we have been interested in our audience doing the story and not having it told as a film. And apart from the potential in the story of developing interesting mechanics and vice versa, we'll get back to that, we want our players to emotionally feel the experience as they do the story. And merging the game and the documentary have been our base since we met in 2011 and began working on Cosmic Top Secret. In the beginning, it was just an experiment how to merge the uncontrolled and real with the very controlled. And as you now have heard, we argue that the dramatized story, real or fiction, is just as designed as any game and therefore could be just as suitable to be played. And while we have been working with real sound footage and visuals and designing a story in levels simultaneously with developing our mechanics, we've been confirmed from tests that an X factor in Cosmic Top Secret is the real. It's a dimension that attracts our audience and evokes emotions when revealing the relations of the characters in the game. So to conclude, the real is just as designed as a game. Of course, not all stories are suitable for game development, and that being fiction or fact. But a suitable story might as well arise from reality, and to us, the real continuously challenge and inspires.
Developing a documentary game offers some unique challenges in terms of game mechanics, beyond just having a story that's based on true events. And since this game is not just about Trine's family's secrets, it's also about her quest to uncover them, the game is partly documenting its own development. But more importantly, it has meant that the game had to be developed incrementally, story and mechanics changing along with the real-world events. Because of this, we come to think of the development of the game as having two legs. There's the story and there's the mechanics. They're both moving forwards in steps, each step dependent and influenced by the other. So a new development, for example, in the story could mean that the existing game mechanics would have to be changed or completely removed. And as we're working with a story that takes place while we're developing the game, this meant that real-world events could influence the story completely and lead to fundamental changes, not only in the story we're telling, but in the mechanics in the game. And the other way around, but we'll come to that in a minute. In the first demo for the game, the player avatar, T, looked very different from the other characters, and especially from Dad. He was constantly running ahead. He was a fast character, just powering through the game. And the player controlling T would run after him and tilt the world to keep him from falling over the edge. And in addition to this indirect control, the game was controlled with a smartphone, and the game itself was running on a computer. And ultimately, a lot of these novel mechanics were scrapped, and the game we have now is a more traditional adventure game of collecting items and solving puzzles. And this way of controlling the game with the smartphone, it gave a poor feeling of immersion in the story, and the whole wireless setup was very fragile. And as we were about to discover, so was Trine's father. At this point in the development, Trine's dad fell and hurt himself during hand grenade throwing, and he has had difficulties walking ever since. And Trine says she began thinking about him getting old and fragile, and says she found herself for the first time confronted with the fact that he will die someday. Something she wasn't quite sure she was ready to deal with, and not a theme that was supposed to be part of the game story at all. And if this process of prototyping mechanics together with the story elements was not already going on at this point, we likely wouldn't identify the importance of this discovery or of this event. But by including the physics of Dad's body together with the already existing paper world, the emotional and the mechanical core of the game appeared. So Dad's injuries, as there would be more than one, are shown in the game as pieces falling off the paper doll. The player, as T, will then find these and return them to him as she learns more about her family and tries to come to grip with her father growing older. But paper is not only fragile, it's also versatile. And what was at first mainly the visual aesthetic of the game, photos cut out, everything made out of paper, cardboard, old documents, punched tape, suddenly this became the basis for the mechanical core of the game as well. And after we moved away from the problematic smartphone controls, the team came up with the idea of T rolling into a paper ball, the player rolling and flicking her through the game world. It's not only a novel mechanic, but it also serves to symbolize that T needs the player's help to move through the story. She cannot move on herself as a paper doll. And gradually, as the story progresses, she gains more abilities and more mobility. For example, midway through the game, as T is learning more about her mother's involvement with the military intelligence, specifically her work for the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, T learns to fly. She folds herself into a paper plane and glides in the air, flying over Poland to secretly take photos of Soviet installations. This mission is mimicking the real-life exploits of Danish spies during the Cold War. This part of the game is significant because it brings us back to the two legs concept. This story of the Danish spies in Poland was chosen over a number of other possible branches at this point, exactly because it fits so perfectly into the paper world, and our decision to focus on these paper mechanics. So the story we end up with now is substantially different because of this decision. The subjects that would be researched, the people that Trine would go to interview, all these things are concrete elements that were affected by a mechanics decision. So not only did the real-world events lead to changes in the game mechanics, but these in turn changed the story we are telling, including the people involved, the places, so on. So as Lise was talking about, we've not just been designing mechanics to fit into the true story narrative, but the mechanics were developed along the way. They have also had an impact on the reality of the story.
Thank you, Kristian. And now to the third and last point, the C-plot, that the personal is engaging. I wanted to combine the best we know from video games, the controlling of the action, the physical playing, and the joy of succeeding with the sincerity and honesty we know from books, films, graphic novels, and documentaries. I was in particular in love with the autofiction genre as expressed by the Norwegian author Knausgård. Being existentially touched by his very detailed descriptions of how he feels connected with the world, its people, its nature, its history, and at the same time feels like taking care of himself instead of his kids and wife. And this kind of embarrassing personal revelation could be the nerve in a game, why not, and provide us, the players, with a better understanding of our life situation and maybe another view on how to endure our own faults and limitations. To achieve that kind of emotional engagement, we need to make the player identify with the main character. In our case, it's T, who is the connector between this specific story and the player's own story. We want the player to imagine secrets in his own or her own family and reflect on their personal relations. And this is the first drawing born from that wish. We pretty soon realized that we had a solid, good story right at hand about my parents' work for the Danish intelligence. No matter the outcome, how much I would be able to reveal, it would be a story about the process of finding out. And it's easy to say now that it's a fantastic story, wow, having spy parents, of course, that's super appealing. But the point is that I did not know, and I knew parts of it, and somehow I didn't know because it was a secret. And finally, I did not realize the potential of it. Our point is that we might all have those fantastic material within our personal lives that could be used for all kinds of stories and games and before unseen combinations. In our case, we started structuring the game as an adventure game, and with tools stolen from screenwriting, we built it up the dramatic arch. The idea is that the A-plot is the bone of the whole thing. That's where we set up the basic question that wakes up our curiosity. What exactly did Dad work with? The B-plot is the meat. That's the little details in the authentic conversations between people that makes us laugh. Not because we are ridiculous, but because we recognize it from ourselves. How is it to drive the car with your dad, for instance? But in the end, it's another question that is being answered. It's the one that is expressed via the C-plot. Will T be able to manage on her own without her father, and will she come to terms with him and herself growing old? Those questions is reflected in what we might call emotional mechanics. During the development process, we prototyped the mechanics and features of the game simultaneously, as Kristian mentioned earlier, and we discovered the strong concept of the paper aspect and the fragility of Dad going into pieces but also T, the main character, going into pieces caused by the sheer thought of losing her dad, and for the player to use that negative reaction positively to solve the puzzle by the end of the first level. We will not reveal how, of course, but just mention there's a shredder involved. Working with storytelling is a very straightforward, no matter the format, and at the same time totally complex. The most difficult thing is probably to get to the core of what you want to tell. What is it you want to tell the world, and how can you do it, and how can you share that with your team? I knew from the beginning that there was something in my upbringing, something about being isolated and extremely shy that was very hurtful to think about. It was strongly connected to my relation with my parents, the feeling of being dependent on them, as well as wanting to keep them on a distance. It's not a story about abuse or lack of being loved. On the contrary, it's very much about love and feeling connected, yet being alone and being afraid of being left alone, which ultimately happens to all of us when our parents dies. Cosmic Top Secret tries to deal with those difficult feelings. This is where the shredding mechanic became a core element of the game, when the main character T literally goes into pieces by the thought of her dad dying. And even though I set out to reveal those family secrets that might explain why I still, as a grown-up, feel like a protected child, I'm not able to state that as a true fact. I simply no longer believe it's possible to conclude that I've turned out the way I am because of my parents. And I've decided to let it be a question for the player to decide on their own. In that sense, it's no longer my personal story, but hopefully a shared story that can be played as a game. And now for the happy ending, we will end our talk with this sweet couple, father and daughter, who volunteered for testing, and they are the first to have succeeded without any bugs or guidance, though without his daughter's help, he would not have solved the shredder puzzle. The game will be released for iOS, Android, Mac and PC in May, and please support our existence by buying it and liking it. Thanks. Is there time for any questions?
I think there is, yeah. I think we have time for one or two questions, yeah. Just come up to the microphone if you have any questions for any of the speakers. Also, make sure you fill out the evaluations for this talk. It means a lot. Thanks. Is there any questions?
There's one there, I think.
Hi. Do you consider this close to a serious game? Do you know the serious gaming?
Yeah.
Because it's a documentary gaming. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
What question again?
Well, the question is do you consider your game a serious game? Do you put it in that category?
We know it's close to being in that category, but it was not the way we worked with it. We worked with more like an adventure game, telling a story, but with the real and important issues, you may say, but not as a serious game in that sense.
Okay. And so since it's a documentary game, so do we get out of there with more information about this situation?
Yes, yeah, you will.
Okay, good. Well.
Any more questions? There's one coming up.
How has your family reacted to the game?
Oh, that's a good question, yeah. It's really weird to see yourself as a video game character, especially when you don't play that much games yourself. So that's been, yeah, but it's also, they think it's fun as well and interesting. More questions? No? All right, then. Thank you very much.
Let's give them one more round of applause.